Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's afternoon, noon at least. So thank you for being here, and we will be in conversation with Ghazala Wahab. So this is a book that deals with the heartland of India. So we'll, of course, get to discussing why it is called the heartland, why it is the Hindi heartland. And I will just take 30 seconds or to say why we should be paying more attention to what happens in what Ghazala calls the Hindi heartland, because the politics of India is pretty much decided, determined, framed in the Hindi heartland. And not today. It has been like that for certainly 75 years. If you want to be really curious about history, maybe for thousands of years. All that happened in that belt of India has been the key determinant of how the South continent has turned at various points. And that influence of the heartland is going to exponentially increase in the coming decades for sheer demographic reasons. The new census will prove that, and then the delimitation of Lok Sabha constituencies that will follow that will further make the heartland the key center of Indian politics and formation of Indian economy and so on. This book actually takes us through all those factors, historically and in terms of contemporary politics, very richly researched, around 400 pages of prose, and then it is followed by around nearly 50 pages of footnotes and references. So it is absolutely brilliantly researched, well written a book, and Ghazala has been an inspiration for a lot of journalists and writers and commentators of this country. Let us start with a big applause to Ghazala. Thank you for being here. And I think Haryana is not part of heartland according to you. Why?
So thank you, George, for this wonderful introduction, and I'm grateful to Hindu Lit Fest for inviting me to talk about the book. To answer your question first, Haryana, the Hindi heartland is not just a political entity, it's also a geographic entity. So the region that we refer to as Hindi heartland, it's not a linguistic entity, though the term Hindi comes from the language. Which, as I've explained, is the least uniting aspect of this region. The geographic entity determined the politics, the culture, and the interaction between the communities in this region. So the Hindi heartland is the region which is the Indo-Gangetic Valley. So it comes from parts of Rajasthan in the west to Jharkhand's Rajmahal Hills in the east. And in the north, it comes from the foothills of Himalayas, the Uttarakhand, the Gangetic Valley where it begins, until the just short of Deccan Plateau. So Haryana is part of the Indus Valley region because it was, if you recall, it was part of erstwhile Punjab. So it is part, geographically, it is outside this belt.
Right. So even we try to understand regions and geography and communities by categorizing them and labeling them. So Hindi, the language Hindi, what we call the Hindi language today, you have an entire section discussing that thing. So that's a recently new label for, because even today, if you travel from regions of Rajasthan all the way to Magad or Mithila, if you know standard Hindi, you pretty much cannot understand anything that people are saying. So can you take us through the category of Hindi language? How it came into being?
See, the creation of Hindi language was a political project. It was not a very organic evolution of language. Languages evolve organically. I mean, there are a lot of factors by which determine how languages evolve. Technology is one factor. When you're introduced to something new, let's say you're introduced to a door, so you need a word to describe what this thing means. Or if you're introduced to, let's say, a well or an automatic, automated or wheel which draws water from the well, which is called the Persian wheel in English. So when these technologies were introduced to the region, so new vocabulary was developed. So that is a way a language evolves. That is one part of the evolution of language. The other is when people from different linguistic traditions, they interact with one another for commercial reasons, for personal reasons, for reasons of conquest, then they pick up and adapt to each other's languages. But when Hindi was being conceptualized, it was originally conceptualized as a language of the Hindus in India by the British, because when British were trying to, when the British East India Company came to India, they started this college of Fort William, where they were kind of developing various kinds of literature, guidebooks, précis, readers for their personnel, so that people who were coming from Britain, they could get familiarized with the country they're supposed to initially do trade with, but eventually subjugate and rule. So when they were developing these readers, so they needed easy stories. That is how the English language teaching happens. I mean, it always has happened like that. You have readers, you have short stories by which you learn the language. So here they did something similar. And the people, the early four teachers who are writers they employed for the purpose of writing these books, they drew upon their religious sources to write short stories, create short stories. So the Hindu writers were drawing upon Ramayana, Mahabharata, their stories to modify it to suit the British audience. The Muslim writer was drawing upon Islamic stories, drawn from Quran or Hadith, to write these things. So there, the Muslim was using a lot of words from Persian, from Arabic, because that was his source material. The Hindu writers were using a lot of Sanskrit words, again, because that was their source material. And then the British realized suddenly that in this huge corpus of our Indian language that they're trying to develop for their personnel, there existed two different languages belonging to two different religious traditions. So that is when the first differentiation of language and its connection with religion happened. So they decided that, okay, this one language is for the Muslims and another is for the Hindus. And when the nationalist movement started after 1857 at various levels, there was a feeling, there was a growing sentiment that we need a national language to unite this big, giant country. And this language has to be as good, as superior as English is. So, or Persian was. So this language had to rival Persian and English. So that is when this project of developing Hindi by sourcing vocabulary from other languages, largely Sanskrit, also Persian, was envisaged and undertaken by a lot of organizations. There were organizations in North India, especially in UP. There was Nagrik Pracharani Sabha, which was, Nagrik is a script in which Hindi is written. So Pracharani means propagation. Sabha is a society. So society for the propagation of the script in which Hindi is to be written. So these organizations came about, and eventually what happened was all the regional languages, they were reduced to dialects because they wanted to create a mother language. So a mother language has to have a lot of offshoots.
This is the case of mother actually following the children.
Yes, that was the case. But because the mother had to be the mother.
Mother had to be birthed out of
all the children. So they were assimilated to create a language.
So, in fact, just quickly connecting you to, so you depict this scenario of Babur when he comes into what is today Uttar Pradesh. What he encounters is a medley of local cultural practices, and he is unable to figure out what is Islam and what is Hinduism, which is a challenge actually which continues even all the way up to 1931 census. The Census Commissioner is saying that we can't really tell who is a Muslim and a Hindu because it's too much of mixing, and he has actually not concluded even caste. But while in the midst of that difficulty, there is a kind of deliberate political project to make labels and categories, what you just described, the Hindi and the Urdu being one of the main political projects in early 20th century. So you mentioned Bharadendra Harishchandra's travel to Bengal, where he thought that, okay, Bengalis have actually found some kind of cultural identity in their language, so let me also navigate and create something around Hindi. And then as you just now, so you, within what was commonly shared, a language landscape, you carve it out, one segment, you load it with more and more Sanskrit words, which becomes what we know as Hindi today, and the other segment, you load it more and more with Persian and Arabic, you said, right?
Yes, and Turkic words also.
And that becomes the Hindu-Urdu divide as we now know. Yes. Have I characterized it?
Yes, yes, that's correct.
How does it become Hindu and Muslim then?
Because, as I said, in Fort William itself, the British realized that one language or one kind of vocabulary was being more by the Muslims and the another was being used more by Hindus. So that is when the religion was associated with the languages. And that is the origin of the division. Subsequently, after 1857, because as everybody would know, 1857 was a watershed moment in India. That was, the two communities, despite the hostility which was being induced by the British by playing one another against another community, they kind of combined, united to fight against the British. The earliest slogans at that time during 1857 or leading up to 1857 were being used by both Muslims and Hindus were that British are attacking our deen and our dharam. So deen is faith used in Urdu and dharam is faith in Hindi. So both Muslims and Hindus, they had united because they felt that their religions were being attacked by the British. So after this, the British project of keeping the two communities aside was even more important because they saw the consequence of their coming together. So the language division was the easiest because, as you said, there was so much of intermingling between the two communities. There was so much overlapping of practices that it was difficult to tell one from the another community. So language became the easy tool, the most accessible tool in which to foster the division. So and then also they linked the language, the knowledge of language to employment. So during once the change of power happened from East India Company to the British Empire, certain number of government jobs opened up for Indians, the lower bureaucracy. So they linked this employment with the knowledge of language. And that language then they said would be Hindi in the northern regions. So Bihar was the first to adopt this law that knowledge of Hindi is important for government employment. Madhya Pradesh followed. I mean, they were not called Madhya Pradesh or Bihar at that time. But these were the states which were the earliest ones. The last state to implement this law was Uttar Pradesh, the Awadh, Agra and Awadh region. Because this was the cradle of the Muslim rule in India. I mean, not just the Mughals, but before Mughals, the Delhi Sultanate. So there was a lot of the cultural landscape, the linguistic landscape, the culinary landscape of this entire region was hugely influenced by Mughals and before them the Sultanate, the Central Asian region. So this was the last state to accept the language formula. And it needed people like Bharatendra Harishchandra's efforts, Madan Mohan Malviya's efforts to ensure that Hindi became the official language in this part.
Right. So we always refer to the British efforts to divide and rule, but there is a kind of British are facilitating, of course, that division. And there is also material circumstances that are otherwise created by colonialism, enabling this kind of argumentation and communication. But there is also domestic Indian-grown movements which are actually pretty happily joining that argument, and they are creating divisions. between the communities, creating this identity of Hindus and Muslims as two separate categories. It is not only a British imposition, if I may say. Would that be a correct way of looking at it?
See, I do not entirely agree with that. I think this consciousness of different identity or this consciousness of difference came because of the British efforts at creating this division. The first census which happened in India, the first ever census, because we did not enumerate people until the British came. So this first census, the people who were doing the counting, they had great difficulty finding who's who. So they were given special keys to ask specific questions, and on the basis of those questions, the British enumerators categorized people. And even these keys, these very specific questions like, do you celebrate this festival? Or do you wear vermilion in your hair? So they were trying to determine a person's religion through these symbols, these practices. Because a person was unable to identify oneself as a Muslim or as a Hindu. Because in most parts of North India, even today, a lot of Hindus still identify themselves by their caste. They're either Brahmins or they're Kshatriyas or by their villages where they come from, or their regions where they come from, or the language they speak. So if they are speaking Bhojpuri, so they're Bhojpuri speakers, whether they're Hindu or Muslims. So the identity or this hardening of religious identity was a British enterprise. Once this happened, the first, I think, the first community which sort of tried to preserve itself were the Muslims, because they bore the biggest burden of 1857 reprisals by the British. This Darul Uloom, University of Islamic Learning, opened up in Deoband in Uttar Pradesh. And one of the objectives, apart from teaching of Islam, one of the objectives of Darul Uloom was to create a Muslim identity based on what was envisaged a century ago, a century before 1857, by Islamic scholar Shah Waliullah. He was a Delhi-based scholar, and he said that a Muslim should not only be Muslim in practice, he should also, or she should also look like a Muslim. So Muslims should also have a very specific Islamic identity. It should be through their clothes, through their language, through behavior, everything. So Darul Uloom's, one of the objectives of this institution in Uttar Pradesh was to create this Muslim identity, to enforce this Muslim identity, especially upon women.
So that actually remains, now that you mentioned dress, so that still date, that remains a part of the debate and controversies, so much so that we had a statement saying that you may have come across a statement about Pakistan telling its women diplomats never to appear in sari, always in a salwar kameez. So this language and dress, you're looking at different ways of segregating people and enforce this category of Hindu and Muslim. That becomes one primary categorization in the heartland that we are mentioning. And second, as you alluded to, becomes caste. That is actually, that pretty much marked out, those two aspects mark out the uniqueness of Hindu heartland in comparison with the rest of India. Let us say in Tamil Nadu, you will, the Tamil identity will have precedence over religion and caste, which also exist. If you go to Kerala, people have different, but why is it that the idea of a region is extremely weak, and that itself is the reason why you have to categorize pretty much 40% of India's geographical area under one category called the Hindu heartland?
See, this region has been, as I said, united by geography, and this geography facilitated easy movement of people. So when there is easy movement of people for employment purposes, for purposes of marriage or anything, there's diffusion of identities. That is one of the reasons that identities were very diffused, and this was a challenge which British faced when they did the first enumeration. I'll explain why these identities were diffused. Because when the Delhi Sultanate was formed in Delhi-Agra region, you had a very powerful center. And when a powerful center radiates power to its periphery, everything then is determined by that powerful center. So the politics was being determined by this powerful center. The society, the evolution of society, the evolution of eating, food was being determined by this powerful center, which is why there's a lot of similarity of food in this entire region, similarities of language, because then there was imposition of one language. I mean, Persian was a court language. Below Persian was a Hindustani, a lingua franca, which people would speak to the ruling class, which the bureaucrats would speak to the ruling class. There is an example which I use very often. Just imagine Akbar marrying a Rajput princess. I mean, he would be talking to her in some language. He couldn't have been talking to her in Persian, because the Rajput princess Harkabai wouldn't know Persian. So there was an evolution of a lingua franca, a common via language. So
that is Hindustani.
That is Hindustani, which combined a lot of languages of this region. And this was a language which was eventually split into Urdu and Hindi. So, well, let me just give me half a second. And below this was the third tier of language, and that was the regional languages. So that was Magadhi, Awadhi, Braj, Bhojpuri, Dingal, Kumaoni, Garhwali, all these languages. So even today, when the government of India talks of a three-language formula, this three-language formula existed even in the 15th and the 16th century very organically. The ruling class were talking in Persian with one another. Their subordinate bureaucrats were talking in Hindustani. And when they came home, they were speaking to their family in their local language.
So there's a three-language formula, very hierarchical, as you just described. You have on the top of it the ruling class, Persian, and then Hindustani is what existed, or whatever you can broadly call Hindustani is what existed before it was carved out into Hindi and Urdu. Am I right?
That's right.
That's the
yes.
point. All right. Okay. So now you mentioned Akbar. Can you just tell us the story of how Akbar was born while his father was had taken refuge at a Rajput family, something to that effect?
Yes, a Rajput family in present-day Sindh, which is Pakistan now. But at that time, it was part of this large Rajasthan Sindh expanse. So, yes, he was born in a Rajput family which had given shelter to Humayun and his wife, who were escaping Sher Shah Suri's forces in the Hindi belt. So actually, I'll tell you a very interesting thing. We talk of insider, outsider. That these were outsiders.
Who came early? Who came first? Yeah.
Yes. So when Sher Shah was challenging Humayun, because Humayun and Babur, they came from Central Asia. Sher Shah Suri came from Afghanistan. So Afghans identified themselves as Indians. So when he rallied an army to wage a war against Humayun, he was waging a war on behalf of Hindustan against the outsider. And he was recognized as Indian. Subsequently, when the British came, and British were also trying to foster, because their main challenger was Bahadur Shah Zafar. So when they were trying to cast Bahadur Shah Zafar as an outsider, they portrayed Sher Shah Suri as an Indian who challenged the Mughal might. So they commissioned biography on Sher Shah Suri, extremely exaggerated, laudatory biography, which said Lion of India and all that. That's how the name Sher Shah came about. So he was recognized as an Indian, though he was an Afghan. And today we would say Afghans are outsiders. We're hunting down outsiders today. So even Afghans are no longer Indian. But at that point, because we were, see, this is how politics has, it's not new. Even then, this is how the politics shaped who would be regarded as your own and who would be regarded as an outsider.
And that process, which is actually in a very intense phase right now, in the region that you speak about and spreading to the rest of the country. So from reading your book, I get an impression that you are looking at Babur's entry into that region as a kind of turning point, because Babur is a little uncomfortable with the idea of these mixed practices, and he's trying to invoke a kind of a heightened piety and commitment to religion among his own followers. Is that what's happening in the early 16th century?
No, actually, amongst the Mughals, the first ruler who tried to create a Muslim identity and who tried to cast his empire as a Muslim empire was Shah Jahan, not Aurangzeb. In fact, Aurangzeb just followed his father's footsteps. I don't know how many people here would know that Shah Jahan actually portrayed himself as some kind of a mystic, as a Sufi. And for a very long time in Agra, they used to have a Urs. Even this year, they held an Urs in Agra in memory, and Urs is held in the memory of Sufi saints. So Shah Jahan was the first Mughal who created an Islamic identity and who described himself as being chosen by God to rule. Until Shah Jahan, the Mughals were very easygoing as far as religion was concerned. Babur was bisexual. There was no parda among women. He was very fond of his drinks, even though he used the example of jihad when he was rousing his forces, and he symbolically broke his wine glass to say that from henceforth I'm a mujahid, I'm a warrior in the name of religion. But he never stopped drinking, despite all the dramabazi. So the thing is that this Islam and his son Humayun, again, very fluid identity, because for sake of power, he said, oh, I can be Shia also, I can be Sunni also. He was playing both sides. Akbar, again, most of his mannerisms were adapted from the Hindu culture, the kind of clothes he started wearing. He turned vegetarian 3 times a week. He would eat only vegetarian food. He started sitting cross-legged. And if you read his biography, Akbar's biography, he was very fond of using Indian invectives. He was very comfortable using Hindustani in his communications. His language, his mode of communication was Hindustani. So all of this was part of not only adapting to the country which you now described as your own, or which you now identified as your own, but also the influence of that region on your own self. Because if you're spending so many years in one place and you're not remitting your earnings anywhere else, I mean, what you're doing here, you are reaping that benefit here. Whether the revenue you're generating here and you're building big monuments here or whatever, or helping the economy, creating industry, small-scale industry, facilitating trade. So all this was happening inside India. I mean, nothing was going outside. The revenue wasn't going outside, which was the case with the British. So obviously there was a two-way process of influence. They were getting influenced and they were influencing at the same time.
So what you're calling the heartland, in all practical terms, for Indian politics, not only after India became, even during the national movement, that actually gets overlapped or becomes synonymous with what is national, because there is something national and that's something regional. So Tamil Nadu is regional, Andhra Pradesh is regional, Kashmir is also regional. So what is not regional becomes heartland, therefore that is national. That is how Indian politics has played out, right?
Actually, politics is only one part of it, and the biggest example is Prime Minister Modi, who, when he wanted to be the Prime Minister, he came from Gujarat to Banaras. So,
even Gandhi from Gujarat, he had to go to Bihar to
Bihar, Champaran,
mobilize people, because that is where people are.
Yes. Yep. So politics is only one part of it. But if you see in the popular perception, the idea of India, I mean, I'm sorry, a lot of people here will not like it, but in popular perception, when you go outside India and when you think about what is India or what Indian food is or what Indian clothes are, a lot of it comes from North India. which is unfortunate. It should not be like that, but that is the reality. So even in the menu of five-star hotels, if you see the Indian food, most of the food is from North India, from the Hindi heartland, and food from the state is categorized as regional cuisine. So that's the, and then you see movies, Hindi film, which should be Indian films. I mean, everybody, all the films should be counted as one, coming from India. But unfortunately, for the longest period, entertainment, the way it was seen outside India, the practice of religion as it was seen outside India. So this idea of India emanated from this region. So it was basically its cultural, its social influence or impact on the rest of the country was quite huge. This has also to do with the fact that there was a very strong central authority even before the British came. When I keep talking about the Delhi Sultanate. So the Delhi Sultanate, the center of power for them was the Hindi heartland, and from there power radiated to other parts of India, including the Deccan Plateau. So the sultans came to the Deccan Plateau. A lot of them came from the northern region, and they brought with them the attire, the long robes. They brought with them the language, Persian. They brought with them the eating habits. So you have biryani, and you have a combination of, roasting onion before cooking the meat. So all of this comes from this part. So I think I'm not being parochial when I say this, that to a very large extent, despite its social backwardness today and despite its economic backwardness today, the popular idea of India comes from this region. Political power is one aspect. You see religious power. You see all the sites of religious importance, even for Hindus, whether it's the dhams.
Sacred geography is located there. So we refer to, I think, the river Kaveri as the southern Ganga. The reference point is...
but you refer it to as Ganga.
Yes.
Southern Ganga. Then you have Banaras, you have Haridwar, you have Gangotri, you have all the dhams. So I think that is the reality.
Right. So what, in that sense, the... I thought this is only the discussion. All included. All right, okay. Okay, so I've been asked to now open this to the audience, which I will do. So I will just finish the line that I was... so what we see today in North Indian politics, a hyper-consolidation of Indian nationalism, it is a continuum. It is not started in 2014 or even 1989 or 1992. Where with Heartland, this area, this is, by the way, exactly it is in the Heartland that Mr. L.K. Advani took his Rath Yatra. He started from Gujarat, of course, just outside the periphery of the Heartland, and then he moved through the Heartland. So now, when you look at the Heartland, that is where Indian politics is going to play out in the coming days as well. So we'll take, I think, 2 or 3 quick questions, and then you can respond all of them together. We have only 4 minutes to go. Kalpana, you want to?
So I think my, okay.
Can we have a mic here, please? Yeah.
A very quick question, Ghazala, which is the idea of the heartland itself, and I think the last question was referring to that. Is that something that you are critically interrogating, the construction of why and how this region comes to stand for the rest of India, or is it something that you sort of take for given as a granted, and then you say, now let's look at it closely, given that this is the dominant idea about this region? I'm wondering how you are treating that. And also if the relationship between the so-called heartland and the so-called regions, right, is also part of the story, right? Because one constitutes the other. You can't have the heartland without what is not the heartland, right?
Thank you, Kalpana. Anyone else? Anybody? Oh yeah, to Priya there. Yes.
So, Ghazala, how did we end up calling this important, how did we end up dismissing this once important and still important region as, oh, the Badlands, the Cow Belt, you know? When did that happen and how?
Last question.
Yeah. So Ghazala, I wanted to check, what do you feel? Do you think that the power of the heartland is waning at all? Has there been any kind of shift?
Yeah, so you got, no?
Yeah. So basically, the first question, the book is it's a profile of this region. So I look at this region from geographical, historical, political, cultural, social, linguistic, in all aspects, and why this region has come to the point today in history where we are today, where it is backward. How did it become economically impoverished? So I look at that. How did it become socially regressive? So I look at that. And why it continues to wield so much of political influence on the rest of the country. So it is basically looking only at this region. I'm not looking at the other parts of India. I refer to them only in the passing to reinforce the idea that why this region always wielded more influence on the rest of the country. So that is what I'm doing. I think the reason why it has become both socially and economically impoverished to a very large extent has been the consequence of colonization. I put the entire blame on the British colonial period. The reason is that before the British came to India, this part, which we call UP and Bihar belt, this was one of the richest parts of not only India, but the entire South Asian region. The amount of food crop that UP and Bihar were generating, it earned its epithet of granary of the world. They were generating so much of food grain that they could feed the entire Europe alone after feeding themselves. This is the reason that there was no absolute poverty in India before the British came. The reason the poverty or economic degradation happened was the British were not interested in Indian food grains because that was not the food they were eating. So they converted the huge farmlands into cash crops. They forced the farmers to grow cash crops like indigo, like opium, like in western UP, sugarcane, cotton. And because of their greed, they did not follow the pattern of cultivation. You know, you do one crop, then you give it a break, you grow a food, you have a food cycle, then you grow the crop again. They did not do that. So actually, the famines started happening. I mean, they were earlier also driven by the weather, but they became more rampant during this period. This economic depredation led to people losing their skills because the farmers were no longer able to produce what they were to sustain themselves. They ended up being cheap labor working on farmlands.
So the last question, if you could just, whether the region is losing its political weight or it is gaining more.
I'm sorry, I wanted to say something more, but that's okay.
Yeah,
I'll talk
we need to wrap up because I do not want that question unaddressed. Yeah.
No, I don't think it can lose its political influence anytime soon. Because of sheer number of people who live in this region, and also because the politicians, even in India, still see this region as the entryway to national politics.
Right.
If you see people like Uvaisi, from Hyderabad, he has to move up north, Bihar, UP, and all these places to expand his party. So I think it's not losing its political influence anytime soon.
So ma'am, just to add to the last question, I think when the next delimitation happens, the redistribution of Lok Sabha seats, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar will have at least 15-20 additional Lok Sabha seats, and Tamil Nadu will lose at least 7 or 8 seats. So I think that is a marker of how that will go. Just to conclude this note on a small tale from Venkat Dulubale's book, Pakistan was formed in Pakistan, but the battle for Pakistan was fought in Uttar Pradesh. So that is how important Uttar Pradesh is for the region's politics. Thank you, Ghazala Wahab, for this fantastic conversation, and many congratulations for this beautiful book.
Thank you so much.